Max Holloway sets record and sends the Korean Zombie into retirement after a vicious knockout. UFC Fight Night 255 took place last Saturday in Singapore, and Max Holloway was a massive favorite on the betting line, -700, against Korean fan favorite Chan Sung-young, known as the Korean Zombie. Holloway lived up to expectations and scored a third-round KO, sending the Korean Zombie to retirement after the loss in their featherweight bout. It was another instant classic from one of the most beloved and exciting fighters to ever step inside the octagon, as Sung-young brought fire to Holloway. In the end, the former champ landed a right hand that sent Young to the ground in the third round, but it was just one last gift to fight fans from Young, after a long UFC career full of chaotic and thrilling bouts. Young's emotional retirement propelled plenty of reactions in the arena and on social media. Here is how the MMA world paid respect to Young in his retirement at UFC Singapore. Max Holloway continues setting records in the featherweight division. Here are some stats with his win over the Korean Zombie. Total fight time of 6 hours 47 minutes and 24 seconds in UFC featherweight competition is most in divisional history. 20 victories in UFC featherweight competition are the most in divisional history. 11 stoppage victories in UFC featherweight competition are the most in divisional history. 9 knockout victories in UFC featherweight competition are most in divisional history. He has landed 3,197 significant strikes in UFC competition, the most in company history. 10 fight night bonuses for UFC featherweight bouts are most in divisional history. He is the only fighter in UFC history to complete 28 octagon appearances without suffering a knockdown. What is next for the former champion? He has lost 3 times to the current champ Alex Volkanovski, but has won all his other fights against top contenders in the division. Should he move up to lightweight, or should he keep fighting at featherweight till the UFC has no other option but give him another crack at the featherweight title? Like the Korean Zombie, here's a list of MMA legends who also retired in 2023. Mixed martial arts is a brutal sport and is constantly evolving. If you are a fan and have been following the sport for a while, you are witnessing now fighters who helped make the sport so popular begin to hang up their gloves like the Korean Zombie did this past Saturday. The urge to compete, and perhaps money and fame, will continue to drive these fighters back to the cage, even well beyond their prime. 2023 has seen an increase of notable names walking away from the sport. Here are some of the legends and fan-favorite fighters who decided to hang their gloves in 2023. Claudio Silva turned professional in late 2007, competing at both middleweight and welterweight, primarily for regional promotions in England, where he compiled a record of 9-1 before signing with the UFC in late 2013. The fighter retired in January of 2023, and has notable wins over Danny Roberts and current UFC welterweight champion, Leon Edwards. Legendary fighter from Brazil, Mauricio Shogun Rua, closed out his career after a TKO loss to Ilir Potieria at UFC 283 in January of this year. The former UFC light heavyweight champion and Pride Grand Prix champion has notable wins over names like Chuck Liddell, Lyoto Machida, Forrest Griffin, Alistair Overeem, and Quinton Rampage Jackson. Former UFC light heavyweight champion, Glover Teixeira, came to UFC 283 main event to reclaim his light heavyweight belt against the young Jamal Hill in Brazil. Glover came short on this fight, and Hill claimed the vacant 205-pound strap, winning in unanimous decision over Teixeira. After the fight, he announced his retirement from competition. The former UFC light heavyweight champion has notable wins over names like Rashad Evans, Ian Blachowicz, Quinton Rampage Jackson, and Antony Smith. One of the most popular names in MMA history, Fedor Emelianenko, is the legendary former Pride heavyweight champion. He came up short in his fight against Ryan Bader to claim the Bellator heavyweight belt in his retirement fight back in February, suffering a first-round TKO. Fedor closed his career on a low, but it didn't take anything away from a career of great achievements. The Last Emperor has notable wins over names like Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Kevin Randleman, Mirko Cro Cop, Frank Mir, Chael Sonnen, and Quinton Rampage Jackson. One of the most popular names in today's MMA, Gamebred finishes his professional MMA career with fights that extends back to May 2003. For 2 decades, Masvidal competed for the UFC, Strikeforce, and Bellator, among other promotions. He captured the UFC BMF belt in an epic fight against Nate Diaz, and decided to retire after his loss to Gilbert Burns at UFC 287, back in April. Masvidal has notable wins over names like Tim Means, Michael Chiesa, Donald Cerrone, Darren Till, Ben Askren, and Nate Diaz. The 35-year-old Brazilian, Amanda Nunes, won 16 of 18 octagon appearances and became a 2-division champion in the UFC, at bantamweight and featherweight. Considered by most the female GOAT, Amanda put on one last sensational performance back in June by dominating Irene Aldana at UFC 289, and calling it quits after their bout. Lioness has notable wins over names like Germaine de Randamie, twice, Sarah McMahon, Valentina Shevchenko, twice, Miesha Tate, Ronda Rousey, Raquel Pennington, Chris Cyborg, Holly Holm, and Juliana Pena. Former UFC and WEC lightweight champion, Smooth Ben Henderson, competed in MMA at the highest level for over 17 years. He decided to retire after losing the Usman Nurmagomedov in the lightweight Grand Prix at Bellator 292 in March. Henderson has notable wins over names like Donald Cerrone, twice, Jim Miller, Clay Guida, Frankie Edgar, twice, Nate Diaz, Gilbert Melendez, and Patricio Freire. Longtime Team Alpha male fighter, Chad Money Mendes, retired after a memorable career spent in both the UFC and WEC before returning for a pair of bare-knuckle fights. Mendes decided to retire after his war with Eddie Alvarez, at BKFC 41 back in April. Chad has notable wins over names like Cub Swanson, Darren Elkins, Clay Guida, and Ricardo Lamas. The legendary career of ruthless Robbie Lawler is probably one of the most exciting in MMA history, period. On top of his numerous other accolades, most notably holding the UFC welterweight title from 2014 to 2016, Lawler is the only person in history to win MMA Fighting's Fight of the Year award 3 consecutive times. On top of that, 2 of those bouts, his fights with Carlos Condit and Rory MacDonald, are widely viewed as 2 of the greatest bouts in MMA history. And he probably has the best retirement in UFC history, with his 38-second knockout of Nico Price in his final bout at UFC 290, back in July. Lawler has notable wins over names like Melvin Manhoff, Josh Koscheck, Rory MacDonald, twice, Jake Ellenberger, Matt Brown, Johnny Hendricks for UFC welterweight title, Carlos Condit, Donald Cerrone, and Nick Diaz. The combat sports icon, Alistair Overeem, had successful runs in the UFC, K1, and Strikeforce. This past July, the Demolition Man quietly announced his retirement during an interview at Love in Dubai show. Overeem's last UFC appearance was in February 2021, a second-round TKO loss to Alexander Volkov. Alistair has notable wins over names like Brock Lesnar, Fabricio Verdum, twice, Mark Hunt, twice, Junior Dos Santos, Andrei Arlovsky, and Frank Mir. The 35-year-old bantamweight, Marlon Magic Moraes, was the World Series of Fighting champion, before challenging Henry Cejudo for the UFC bantamweight title, at UFC 238. He suffered a knockout loss to Gabriel Braga, at PFL 4, back in June, that ultimately served as his 7th loss in a row, and the fighter hung up his gloves after the fight. Magic has notable wins over names like Jose Aldo, Rafael Asuncio, Aljamain Sterling, and John Dodson. Alex Pereira not happy about Antony Smith's comments. During the UFC Fight Night 225 Media Day, UFC fighter and desk analyst Antony Smith said that at light heavyweight, Pereira is not the large scary monster he was at middleweight. On his YouTube channel, the former middleweight champion decided to watch and comment on Smith's last fight against Ryan Spann. And Poton is surprised to see a fellow fighter being critical of him and others. Since he's a commentator, I always see him talking, especially about me. He talks really bad. I don't know what he has against me. This guy is frustrated because I'm already making good money, going for another championship, entering another weight class. All eyes are now on me, and he's stuck in a rut, just the way he is. He has to keep criticizing fighters, maligning them just for a bit of recognition and to make himself look better. The only ones who speak bad about me are Antony Smith types, washed-up vets who never amounted to anything, who are still fighting. They're in a really tight spot, or the guy who is still a nobody. But those who are already doing well, I don't see them talking about me. It's just the ones beneath me. You get me? Or those who tried and failed, bitter souls like Antony Smith. I don't really like doing this, coming here just to badmouth people. Actually, I'm not bad-mouthing anyone, I'm just speaking the truth. What do you think? Are these two light heavyweights setting a possible match in the future? And who do you think would win this bout?